For over 2,000 years, the pyramids have stood in silence, massive, mysterious, and unmoved. But when Roman emperors and scholars came face to face with these ancient wonders, something strange happened. They admired them. They even tried to claim them. Yet somehow, they completely misunderstood them. This is the story of how one of the most advanced civilizations in history got the age of the pyramids wildly wrong, and why that mistake still matters. A monument that outsmarted an empire. The Romans conquered half the world. They built aqueducts, roads, and cities that still stand. But when they stood before the Pyramids of Giza, they didn't have a clue how old they were. That's not an exaggeration. The most powerful empire of the ancient world stared up at monuments already older than their civilization, and got it completely wrong. They couldn't name the pharaohs. They had no real timeline. Some even thought the pyramids were built after the Trojan War. To the Romans, Egypt was impressive, but confusing. Instead of trying to understand it, they reshaped it to fit their own myths and ideas. And it all started with one monument that left Rome scratching its head. But that was just the beginning. What they did next reveals even more. The Obelisk. That confused Rome. In the year 357, Emperor Constantius II did something dramatic. He ordered a massive obelisk, carved centuries earlier in Egypt, to be brought all the way to Rome. It was over 100 feet tall and weighed nearly 500,000 kilograms. Just moving it across the sea required a custom-built ship, and thousands of men strained to raise it in the Circus Maximus. The Romans were in awe of its size, but they were even more puzzled by its surface. Strange symbols, hieroglyphs, covered every side. No one could read them. The name Ramestes appeared again and again. But who was this mysterious king? A god? A myth? A foreign ruler from a forgotten age? No Roman historian could say. And that's what's so surprising. They proudly displayed Egyptian monuments across the empire, but didn't understand the messages literally carved into them. They brought Egypt to Rome, but left its history behind. And yet, for all their confusion, the Romans were obsessed with Egypt. And that obsession only grew stranger with time. Egypt, the ancient of the ancients. To the Romans, Egypt wasn't just old, it was ancient beyond reason. A land of animal-headed gods, hidden tombs, and secrets buried in the sand. They believed its temples and monuments came from a time so far back, it couldn't be measured by normal history. And in a way, they weren't wrong. When Julius Caesar set foot in Alexandria, the Great Pyramid was already over 2,500 years old. To put that in perspective, it would be like us walking into a fully intact skyscraper built before the fall of Babylon. But here's the twist. The Romans didn't realize just how old Egypt really was. They leaned on Greek historians like Herodotus, who wildly miscalculated the past. Some believed the pyramids were built just a few centuries before Rome was founded. Others thought a Greek slave girl commissioned one. Their entire timeline was off by more than 1,000 years. And the pyramids weren't the only thing they misunderstood. Their errors went deeper, right down to who built them and why. The Pyramid Problem. The Pyramids of Giza were towering tombs built for pharaohs, aligned with the stars, engineered with astonishing precision. The Romans knew they were ancient, but they had no idea how ancient. Herodotus guessed the Great Pyramid was built around 1200 BC, just after the Trojan War. Diodorus put it a couple of centuries later. One legend even claimed a Greek slave girl named Rhodopis commissioned one of them in the 6th century BC. The truth? The Great Pyramid was built around 2600 BC, over 1,000 years earlier than any Roman guess. So why the confusion? Because the Romans trusted old Greek sources over actual Egyptian records. Herodotus was treated like gospel, even though his timelines were way off. They weren't just misinformed, they didn't care to look deeper. And that blindness wasn't accidental. It came from something far bigger: the slow death of ancient knowledge. Why did they get it so wrong? The Romans weren't just guessing, they were cut off from the truth. For centuries, only a handful of Egyptian priests could read hieroglyphs. As time passed, even that knowledge disappeared. By the late 4th century, no one alive could understand the writing on the walls. One scholar, Manetho, actually got it right. In the 3rd century BC, he wrote a history of Egypt in Greek, dating the pyramids to Egypt's earliest dynasties. But the Romans ignored him. They stuck with Herodotus, not because he was accurate, but because his version fit their expectations. The truth was there. They just didn't look. And yet, that didn't stop them from falling in love with everything Egyptian, just not in the way you'd expect. Egyptomania. Obsession without understanding. The Romans misunderstood Egypt, but they were obsessed with it. They filled their villas with paintings of the Nile. They lined their cities with imported obelisks. Wealthy elites even built pyramid-shaped tombs for themselves, copying what they couldn't comprehend. To them, Egypt was exotic, mysterious, and ancient, the perfect symbol of prestige. But the meaning behind the symbols? Lost. The gods were strange, the rituals confusing, the writing unreadable. Still, none of that mattered. Egypt was fashionable. Even as they distorted its history, the Romans clung to its image. They didn't need to understand it. They just needed to own it. But there was a deeper irony here. Because while Rome was trying to preserve its own legacy, it was standing in the shadow of a civilization that had already lasted longer, and still wasn't done. A deeper irony. Rome saw itself as eternal, the peak of civilization. But as its emperors admired the pyramids, they stood in the shadow of something far older, more enduring, and less understood. The irony? Egypt had already lived through empires before Rome, and it would outlast Rome too. The pyramids were ancient when Caesar arrived. They were still standing when the Western Roman Empire collapsed. And they're still standing today. The Romans thought they were preserving history by bringing obelisks and artifacts to their capital. But in doing so, they tore them from context, stripping away meaning while clinging to the image. They could conquer Egypt. They could decorate their cities with its stones. But they never truly saw the civilization beneath them. Which raises one final question. What else did they miss? Or choose not to see? The blind spot of empire. The Romans ruled Egypt for centuries. They built roads through the desert, taxed its grain, and studied its monuments. But they never truly understood the land they had conquered. They stood in front of the pyramids, some of the oldest structures on Earth, and guessed wildly at their origins. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because they relied on myths instead of asking deeper questions. They trusted the wrong voices and ignored the ones that mattered. In the end, Rome couldn't read what was written in stone. The pyramids had outlived the pharaohs, and they would outlive the Caesars too. And maybe that's the real lesson. History doesn't always belong to the most powerful. Sometimes it belongs to those who remember.